Coming up in this week's episode of TechSNAP, we've got the answers to life, the universe, and everything, plus why you need to get really upset about ACTA and patch your Linux kernel. All that and more in this Q&A packed edition of TechSNAP. Hi everyone, and welcome to TechSNAP. This is episode 42 of Jupiter Broadcasting Systems Network and Administration Podcast. This episode was streamed live on January 26th for release on January 27th, 2012. This episode is brought to you by GoDaddy.com, and I'll tell you more about them as the show goes on. And the live stream is powered by ScaleEngine.com, which is awesome. My name is Chris, and joining me and you, like every single week, is the tech, the teacher, and the admin, Alan Jude. Hey there, Alan!
Hey, Chris, everybody. Thanks for tuning in.
Hey, episode 42. In the tradition of the show, I wore my 42 shirt, which is great.
I just wore my Jupiter Broadcasting shirt.
Well, that's also quite great. And we're going to do a Q&A special because, 42 is the universal answer to, well, pretty much everything. So Why not focus on Q&A? We do have some news we're going to get to.
Just a little bit of important stuff that happened.
Like a more condensed version. And then we've got in the bottom half of the show, I almost used a bad word. In the bottom half of the show, it's our roundup. I just have a couple of things I wanted to touch on before we jump to the news. Is there anything you want to touch on?
I just have a little tease. Next week, we're going to have some more war stories. So make sure you tune in next week, too.
Ooh, those are my favorite. All right, well...
Mine, too.
The first one is we still have TechSNAP at jupiterbroadcasting.com if you want to get a hold of us. We also still have the TechSNAP subreddit at links.techsnap.tv. Those are awesome ways to, especially the subreddit, is an awesome way to submit stories or questions. And the email is a great way to send in your war story if you want to get one on the air or your questions. But we have one more to make it nice and easy for folks. If you go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com now, we have a contact button. And if you hit that contact button, it takes you to a page with a form that you can just easily fill out and just select the show that you want to contact us for, and it sends it off to the right host and the right destination. Also, be sure to check that if you want it marked private, so that way we don't put your name on air or something like that. So that's over at jupiterbroadcasting.com/contact, and so that's just a little bit easier way, because I've heard from people and they said that they sometimes don't know how to get a hold of shows. Even though we give you the email address, I figure one universal way across all of the shows will keep the confusion down. And then one last little plug, a little obnoxious plug I'll give, is if you wouldn't mind thinking of us before you shop, just think of this as a little shameless plug for making a little money here. If you now scroll down to the bottom of jupiterbroadcasting.com on any page in the footer, you can find support us while shopping at links for Amazon US, Amazon UK, Newegg, ThinkGeek, Best Buy, Mint.com, which I don't even know why they give us money when you sign up since they're free, but whatever. And Audible.com.
Well, they have some paid services and they make some money off.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I know they make money.
Sell you credit cards.
Oh, yeah, I know it. In no way Intuit would get into business with something they wouldn't make money for. But anyways, if you just use those links before you shop, then we get credit for your shopping session. And you know what? You could kill two birds with one stone. Like, as you scroll down, you could just right-click on the latest episode of TechSNAP and open a new tab and listen in the background while you shop. I mean, you could do that. You could if you wanted to. That's probably what I would do.
Or since if you watch TechSNAP, you're pretty pro, you probably have two monitors.
Yeah, totally, right? You can always drag one of those URLs to your bookmarks bar, too. Then you don't have to visit the site. But you do have to use the whole URL, so that way they put all of the affiliate junk in there. All right, Alan, what do you say we jump into our first news story? It's a pretty interesting one about DreamHost.
Yes.
And things are not looking so good. That's your cue.
Yeah. So DreamHost had a security problem last week, and they basically went and reset all their customers' passwords, and then to something random. And then rather than send that to the customer, because then the customer wouldn't change it, they sent email out to the customer saying, "All right, now log into our control panel and change your password to something of your own." But they ran into some scale issues with all their customers trying to log in at once.
Oh, yeah, I bet.
Or, just over time. So on January 19th, DreamHost.com detected some unauthorized activity in one of their databases. Now, they weren't very clear as to which databases may have been compromised. Were the databases they're talking about are like DreamHost databases of customer data or of their passwords and so on?
Or was their mailing list?
Yeah, or was it... Well, they're a web host, so was it just the databases of their customers?
Oh, yeah,
right?
Sure.
Like every customer has a MySQL database for their WordPress blog or whatever.
Right.
Now, so DreamHost uses separate passwords for their main web control panel. That's where you log in and do your billing and manage all your accounts, and the individual user accounts for things like SSH and FTP. And so basically what they did was reset all those shell passwords, SSH and FTP and so on. And then they said, all right, customers, log into the main web control panel and set a new password. And then after so many minutes, you'll be able to log into the actual web server again. But they ran into some scale issues there. Basically, they have this centralized control panel, but DreamHost being a giant web host that sells you hosting for $5 or whatever,
right?
Or I think it's less than that if you pay for a year. They had the issue that they oversell so much, and their usual user activity is fairly low. But when everybody was logging in to reset their password at once, they had.
Well, don't we see this like with the cell companies and I mean, hell, Alan, look at cable internet. Cable internet is not designed by its very nature for peak capacity. It assumes that a large portion of the subscriber base won't be active at once.
Right.
And we see that too with like disasters and stuff. The cell phone networks, so many things are built so that they just assume what their average load will be because of the high cost to build to sustain something if you had
exactly
that kind of load all the time.
The phone company doesn't maintain enough capacity so that everybody can make a phone call at once. Right? Again, they're based on overselling their network, and yes, that it's out to be a problem. But anyway, by forcing a fast password reset on every shell and FTP account, DreamHost appears to have promptly ended all the malicious activity, which is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rather than just trying to reset the things that were affected and keep finding more and more things that were affected, they just reset everything right away.
Right.
And while that probably created more issues for their customers, and by the sounds of it, thousands and thousands of support tickets, it did solve the problem right away.
It's a difficult time because the confusion is going to be the highest at any point, and people are just won't have any idea what's going on.
Yeah, and well, the other thing was it took them quite a while to get through the list and email all their customers. I think part of that was they were purposely trickling the emails out to avoid overloading their control panel. But it meant that a lot of people found out about it from other sources like Twitter or Lifehacker and other tech blogs, rather than from their hosting company.
Right.
That their hosting account.
And that can always be spin when you hear it from somewhere else. And I'm wondering too, I mean, are they being just super cautious and just moving with a great efficiency, or are they trying to cover their butts because like they weren't using proper password hashing or something like that? Because they're just like they're not even fooling around. They're just immediately to the password reset, immediately disable the accounts. Now that could be really good, but it also could be indicative of troubles, don't you think?
Right. Because based on how quickly they did the reset and the fact that they reset everything, and some other indications that I've seen, it seems as if at some point that web control panel stores the user's password in plain text. Usually,
you think?
Because they need it for something, likely. But yeah, it doesn't seem like they're using a consistent hashing out. Like when I built a control panel like that back in the day when I had a shell provider, the web control panel used the shell's password hash. So it went the other way around. So to log into the web control panel, its database was a copy of the password file from all the shell servers with the already properly cryptographically hashed password. But anyway, so it seems like they may be storing it in plain text.
Maybe
basically, when you go in and change your password or whatever, it seems to print a confirmation is like your password is now blah to the screen.
Right.
So that means that at least temporarily they had it in plain text, which that makes sense, as part of the post or whatever. But it may indicate that they seem to send it in emails. And it's like one good way to tell if your provider ever stores your password in plain text is try the password reset or I forgot my password system. If it emails you your real password rather than resetting it to something new, that means they had it in plain text.
I mean, either way, I'm glad that they're responding quickly to that. That's
Yes. The other indication was that they reset all the passwords for their VPS customers. It's like, why is the password for the VPS ever in a database anywhere?
Yeah, the customer should have that completely all under their own control when it's
right. That's a separate. It's a virtual machine.
Yeah.
So it seems that they're storing even if they are hashed, they're storing a bunch of passwords in a database where they might not want to do that. Encrypting somebody in the chat room just mentioned about encryption. It's like encrypting passwords is a bad idea because the whole entire point of encryption is that it can be decrypted. So if, for example, this control panel needs access to the password, then it's going to have the key to decrypt the password. So if you hack into that web control panel, you have access to the key to decrypt the passwords, and the passwords might as well not be encrypted. That's why hashing, which is one-way encryption, means you can encrypt it, but you can never decrypt it. The way you test a hash password is to hash the attempt with the same algorithm and the same salt, and if it comes out to the same result, then you know it's the right password.
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. It's just the best way to do it.
It is. And yeah, so encrypting passwords is bad, and anything that says they're doing it that way means that it's most likely because they don't know that they should be hashing it instead.
Or they're just using the wrong vernacular to try to relate to the common consumer.
Sometimes yes, but yeah.
Any other thoughts on this one? Dream. This seems like, I'll tell you my thoughts. This seems like a bad misstep for DreamHost. They're one of those hosts that is frequently just walking that line, and the breach coupled with the scalability issues at a critical time, those are two really bad things that happen to a hosting company.
Yeah.
It's like when Ford had, or whatever company it was that had the exploding tires for a while. It's just not it's not the kind of thing you want to hear.
No.
You want to move on to this next news story?
Yeah, there's another important news story here.
Yeah, okay, so let's put on our Linux Action Show hats, although we're going to, of course, here on TechSNAP, we usually take things a little different direction. This one's about a Linux root exploit that I'm not even sure I'm familiar with, so maybe you could tell me now, so that way I can take the highlight points and put it in the last for the general Linux audience.
So Linux kernel versions newer than 2.6.39, so 0.39 and up, are susceptible to a root exploit that allows you to write to protected memory and basically be able to become root by using any SUID binary, like the SU command.
Yeah.
So basically, prior to 2.6.39, write access was prevented by an IFDEF, a programming convention that said only if this constant is defined can it be possible to write.
Okay.
And so it was a debugging thing, right? And at some point, somebody that worked on the kernel decided that protection wasn't good enough, and so they wanted to replace it. And so they wrote a bunch of new code and replaced that IFDEF. The problem is that the new security code that was meant to ensure that writes were only possible with the correct permissions turned out to be inadequate and was easily fooled into allowing anybody to write to it. And so I've linked to the proof of concept called Mempodipper, which allows you to basically, you just see it's a couple of lines of code and boom, you're root on the machine that you have a regular user account on.
Look at that.
So, if DreamHost was slow about patching that, you could take over a bunch of DreamHost servers.
Oh, yay!
Now, the other thing is somebody also made MempoDroid.
Oh, no, you're kidding
me. Execute the same thing on an Android.
Oh, no.
Which could be good if you need a way around to root your phone. But,
Yeah, here it is on GitHub.
Also,
look at that.
Patch the kernel right afterwards.
I already found it on GitHub. Look at that. Didn't take much searching. That's awesome.
Well, I linked to it in the show notes.
Shut up, Alan. I was being all smooth. Jeez. God. When you do that, you ruin the fourth walls. People think I'm over here like Googling like a madman or something.
Yeah.
I would have, though. I could have. I totally could have Googled that.
Yes.
So it looks like you already have distros with releasing their patches.
Yes.
And does this affect... So anything running on 2.6.3.9 or lower isn't affected then, right?
Right. So anything on an older kernel is still okay. So Ubuntu is confirmed that 11.10 has an update. So you just do your regular kernel update and you'll get the newer version. Red Hat says that Red Hat Enterprise Linux 4, which is really old, or Red Hat Enterprise Linux 5 are not affected because that change wasn't critical. They didn't backport it into their version of the kernel. They only backport security updates, not feature changes. That's one of the features of Red Hat Enterprise Linux is that they don't change anything that they don't have to. Right? Although Red Hat Enterprise Linux 6 did use that feature.
Yeah.
It did use the newer kernel. And so there is a new kernel package for Red Hat Enterprise Linux 6.
Now,
But
what do you...
Red Hat 5 and CentOS 5 didn't backport that change, so they're not vulnerable.
What do you think about
the first times that there's been a vulnerability and it didn't affect Red Hat?
Excuse me. What do you think about Unidentified's question in the chat room where he says, "Is this really a big deal since it's only a local exploit and it's not something that can be taken advantage of over the network?"
It depends. You can do it with, like, you could use a WordPress exploit to execute arbitrary PHP code and then escalate from the web server user to root and take over the whole machine.
Right. It's another way of looking at island hopping. You take advantage of some lower hanging remote exploit, and then once you get that, hop up to the big boy.
Yeah. So if you have physical access, you pretty much automatically already have root access. But if you're over the network, if you have a user account, there's lots of reasons you can have a user account and lots of ways to get a user account. And so, it's not that big a barrier to entry. And then secondly, if you can trick the machine into running any code of yours, then you can basically break out of whatever sandboxing is going on there and get around it.
Indeed.
And so I linked to some more analysis. The guy that discovered the vulnerability actually walks through the changes they made in the kernel and talks about what's actually changed and where the problem in the code is. So if you're interested in learning how the problem, what was actually wrong with the code, you can read through this analysis.
Yeah, I love that. You know me.
Yep.
Always a good nighttime read. This is really a thick one too. There's a lot of examples in this.
Yeah.
So enjoy that, people. You'll geek out on that for sure. Any other thoughts on that story, Alan?
No, that's about it.
All right. Well, like we said, we did a condensed news segment this episode because we're filling it with Q&A in the next segment. Before we jump to that, though, I want to say holler to our good friends over at GoDaddy.com who continue to rock their support of the TechSNAP podcast.
Yes.
And good news, too, when you check out at GoDaddy, if you use the code TechSNAP10, you can save 10% on checkout. And TechSNAP20 will save you 20% on hosting. Maybe a good time to move off of Dream's web hosting, if you know what I'm saying. And also, if you're thinking about getting a .co, maybe if the .com is already taken, or you want to be hip, or
you do one of those domain hacks.
Yeah, I love that actually. I used to be so anti that, and now that I truly understand all of the good domains are taken, I totally grok that. If you want to get a .co, you can get it for a little cheaper if you use the code .co9, and I'll get it for you for $17.99.
Instead of the regular $30, so it's a big savings there.
I went ahead and I used that. I just got geekbasement.co and geekbasement.am. I don't know what I'm going to use them for, but those just seem like such great domain names. And I'm kind of thinking down the road, I want to get a bunch of rights-free music. And at some point, I think I want to do like a 24/7 music mix of old JB shows stream. And I think I might use geekbasement.am for that. So I went over to GoDaddy and I grabbed that. And of course, I used actually the, Alan, what's the code that gets you like 40 or is it TechSNAP 40? Yeah, $10.
40. Yeah, TechSNAP 40 gets you $10 off if you spend more than $40.
That's the one I used.
So right there, that's 25% off.
Yeah, it's pretty sweet. So thanks to GoDaddy.com for supporting the TechSNAP podcast. And use those codes when you check out. And also, the codes are always listed in the show notes of every episode. So you can just go check those and you can see which ones apply to save you the most money. So thanks, GoDaddy. All right, Alan, with that all done, let's move on to the TechSNAP feedback. And it's time for the TechSNAP feedback. And this week, we're doing a big one. We've got 5 questions that we've selected. And thank you for sending them into TechSNAP@jupiterbroadcasting.com. Now, Alan, I think this is like the biggest batch we've done in at least in a very long time, if not ever.
Definitely ever.
Okay. So, do you want to, are you ready? Do you want to?
I'm ready.
Now, of course, I just was trying to figure out how to pronounce this guy's name, and it already escaped me. It was like, do you remember what it was? Zivi, that's what it was. Now, you'll see why when I say why I had troubles with this, because he spells it TZVI. So
TZVI.
Yeah, so I emailed him back and said, can you tell me how to pronounce that? So yeah, it's Zivi, that's right. And he writes, hi guys, first of all, I love the show, keep it up. Well, thank you, sir. We love you. He also said that he hopes we get a nice kickback from Newegg because he bought a lot of hardware for his work from Newegg. So thank you for doing that very much.
Yes.
He says, my question is, can you recommend something to monitor employee internet usage? My company has about 50 employees, and I prefer open source or free, but anything will do. Thanks, guys.
Yes. So there's a couple different ways you can do about this. and it depends exactly what you're after monitoring. But basically, the best way is a proxy server. And so what this actually does is because it's a layer 7 application that understands HTTP, it can log everything that's happening.
Right.
And as a side effect, it can cache stuff and speed up your work's internet and reduce your bandwidth use.
Which is a significant little perk.
Yeah. Especially if everybody is going to the same subreddit or whatever.
Yeah. Or if you have people going to Facebook 100 times a day, you don't really need to pull down that Facebook logo every time.
Yeah. Or even if they're looking at the same pictures on Facebook.
Right.
And so on. So there's a number of ways to monitor and restrict internet access through a connection that you control. So, the proxy server is an obvious answer. The issue with that is it would require configuring each client machine to know where the proxy server is. And also, a lot of times that means different applications, right? Because every separate application has a different setting for how it's going to use the proxy server.
Right.
And it gets really annoying.
Yes.
And so it'll never be 100% successful. And so that's why, rather than that, you have another option known as a transparent proxy.
This is the way I go too, yeah.
Yeah. And basically what this is your router or firewall are actually redirecting traffic outbound to specific ports, like port 80 and 443, which are HTTP and HTTPS, through the proxy server. So it requires no configuration on the individual clients, which is especially good, if people got their iPhone jumping on your Wi-Fi, you're not going to be able to, configure the proxy on their iPhone. Mm-hmm. Right, but you don't want to deny their iPhone access. Right, or maybe you do, but that's
the other issue is like if the user downloads their own browser, if they won't, they don't have to worry about setting all the proxy.
Or I remember, when I was a student in high school, they had all the Internet Explorers configured to go through this proxy the school had called SurFilter that would block any website that contained the word game.
It's a little easier in Internet Explorer because you can do it by group policy and you can set it across the organization. Right,
except for these were Windows 95 machines, so they had. They had GP edit, but they weren't. It was.
You're old, Alan. You're old. Yes. That's
Well, I went to like a rural high school.
Yeah, you're old, man. You're old.
But so they had a group policy, but it was enforced locally on each machine as like a local security policy because there was no domain controller.
Right.
These were also. It was a Novell network. As well.
Good times. Good times.
Anyway, so basically, I could run GP edit. Re-enable access to regedit, open regedit, and disable the proxy in Internet Explorer. Right, so in Internet Explorer, the group policy was blocking me from disabling the proxy, but I could modify the group policy to allow me to change it.
Right.
And so I would just turn it off, and then I would be able to go to whatever website I wanted instead of being restricted by the school's insane censoring policy.
We kind of have an interesting multicultural question going on in the chat room. Piers is asking, isn't it illegal for a company to monitor and restrict where their employees can go on the internet? Which is funny because to me it seems...
It is the company's internet.
Right.
They can do whatever they want with it.
He's saying maybe... Well, it kind of sounded like maybe Germany has... Germany might have...
privacy laws about that?
Yeah, privacy laws that say...
It's possible, but all that means is you have to tell the employees that they're being monitored.
Right.
It's not that you can't monitor them.
So what should he use to do this?
Using your computer and your internet, you have the right to not give it to them at all.
He's mentioned that we've mentioned Squid before on the show.
Yes. So that's what I was recommending here is Squid.
Yeah.
And then what you do is use the firewall to deny all traffic that's not going through the Squid.
Right. So just have the firewall redirect to the Squid box.
And then block anything that's not going through the Squid in that way. Nobody can get out except for through the Squid. And since the Squid's transparent, the users don't know they're going through it, and they don't have to do anything to be able to go through it, and they can't not go through it. Right. So it's fairly useful. And it's relatively easy to set up. I have a kind of an example here. I used to teach a Unix security class at the college, and the final exam for the class was students had 2 hours to configure a machine as follows. They had to configure their TCP/IP stack. So this was it was NetBSD back then because I inherited it from my business partner, and he liked NetBSD at the time. So they had to configure their IP address and everything so that when they rebooted, it would maintain that IP address and so on. The next best part was that the exam instructions were encrypted with GPG. So they had to download and install GPG and copy the class's GPG key from an account I set up to their machine so they could decrypt the exam to find out what the instructions were.
That's awesome. That is awesome. I love them to decrypt it themselves.
Yeah, if you get stuck, it's like for 20% of your mark, I'll do it for you.
Nice.
In case you get stuck. So
that way
you
they can keep going. Yeah.
Then they had to custom compile links with support for SSL. Because if you compile it
by default,
normally, it doesn't have SSL. Or didn't back then anyway.
Right.
Then you had to install the self-signed SSL certificate for our class and the root certificate bundle so that, if you went to Facebook over SSL, it would actually verify that the certificate was valid. Because again, remember, OpenSSL by default doesn't come with a certificate bundle. You had to get one from somewhere else. Mozilla makes one. Actually, because this class was originally written in like 2006 or whatever, and Mozilla was a lot less popular back then, we actually exported the certificate bundle from Internet Explorer, converted it with an OpenSSL command, and then imported it.
Right.
But basically, so you had to set up links so that it would use SSL and actually verify the certificates. Then you would install and configure Squid, and configure Squid to block Facebook with a custom error page. So when you try to go to Facebook, you would get, a get back to work, you lazy sod type error message.
Right.
Then you'd have to configure your links to use that Squid proxy, so that you would learn how to configure links to use a proxy. And then create a default deny firewall that would disallow everything except for HTTP through Squid. So regular machines behind NAT through this firewall wouldn't be able to use the internet unless they went through Squid.
Right. Yeah, perfect.
But we did allow FTP out so that your machine could FTP out to get GPG and so on.
That sounds just right.
And then you had to, on your Windows machine, the college-provided Windows machine, you had to be able to load the college website and Facebook, or actually the error page you had made instead of Facebook.
Then go back to work.
And prove that your Windows machine was using your proxy. And you had 2 hours to do that. But to get 100% on the exam, you had to finish within an hour.
Dang, dude.
So it was like, so there's the 4 components, right? The links, the firewall, the Squid, and I think the SSL.
Yeah.
Or something. I forget what the 4 parts were.
Okay.
And that was 80% of your mark. And then the final 20% was how fast you did it. So if you finished in an hour or less, you got 20% as the bonus time.
I think you're stressing the chat room out. They're like, "Oh my god, that sounds hard."
Yeah, and then it's like every 5 minutes or something like that would take away another.
Well,
1%.
Let me ask you this: Could I show up with like a pfSense disk? Because I was almost wondering if we wanted to recommend look at pfSense because it's a firewall proxy on one box. You don't have to.
That's what I recommend at the bottom here. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what would happen if I showed up in your class with a pf? Would I get extra credit? I mean, come on. I could get that done in like 15 minutes.
Well, no, you wouldn't have installed links and
okay, that's true. Yeah.
Yourself, right?
Okay.
And
I would have to still do that part. You're right.
Yeah. But these students obviously had a bit more practice, right? They spent a couple of labs doing each of these things separately, and then they had a practice exam before to try to get good at it or whatever. But still, it's fairly straightforward, and you too should be able to do it in 2 or 3 hours. Or instead of rolling your own like that, but if you already have a system in place, you might want to just be able to add Squid to it. But if you don't have a solution already in place, pfSense has very specific instructions that I linked to on how to set up Squid as a transparent proxy on your pfSense box. So you can just build a pfSense box, follow these instructions, throw Squid on it really quickly, a couple of config lines to block whatever sites you want, and then you stick this in between your clients and your internet connection, and you're good to go.
Bob's your uncle.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing we did with it in the lab was got the host file list from AdBlock and put it into the Squid proxy, blocking the advertising hosts across all the machines, even if they didn't have the thing installed.
Then you get like first of all, you save bandwidth because you're not loading up those annoying ads. You make people's web pages look better, and every now and then those malware networks or those ad networks can have malware on them.
Yep, and
so
you're blocking that.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure, but I think Squid has the ability to pipe binary downloads through something like ClamAV to actually virus scan them.
You can,
online. And other things you can do with that is you can have Squid keep a log based on each employee and where they're going. And if that's something you need, it's like that's not something I would want as an administrator. I wouldn't want to have to do that. It'd just be annoying and a waste of my time.
Right.
But depending on the policies at where you work, especially if it's somewhere that has you need a security clearance to work there or something.
Oh
it
yeah,
may
yeah.
be important to make sure you're not going to gambling websites while at work.
Now, just for a real quick and dirty blocking a website, I had a client ask me, hey, we just want to block Facebook. We don't want to block any other website, and we want you to do it in an hour, and we don't want to buy any hardware. So I opened up their local DNS server, and I just put facebook.com resolves to localhost 127.0.0.1, and then every time somebody tries to go to Facebook, they just hit a DNS black wall or whatever. So if you just want to block a couple of things, you can do that, but it's not 100%.
That depends on having a local DNS server.
Yes.
If each machine is using, but if you control DHCP there, you can push out that DNS server.
Yep, that's what
Although somebody could still technically manually use something like Google DNS or OpenDNS and then get around it.
If you can't control the DNS, that doesn't work. That'll
And you can have issues if you're trying to block Facebook by IP address or something with a firewall, because they have a lot of different IP addresses and it's globally distributed and so on.
Yep, and they come from a CDN.
Yeah. So if you can, DNS is the best way.
More notes in the chat room or in the show notes. Do you want to move on to Brett's question?
Yes.
All right. So Brett writes in. He says, "Hey there, guys. I want to say thanks for the show." Well, thanks, Brett. Thank you for watching. Jeez. Go. Okay, here it goes. We have a weird prompter thing and it's not going. Shoot. Well, here, I'll just read Brett's question regularly. I don't know why it didn't play. I have a really neat little, it's not so neat, apparently, I guess. I don't know. All right, let me find Brett's question. He writes, what do you do after oh, yeah, that's right. So Brett was the one that asked, hey, guys, I want to say thanks for the show and the hard work, blah, blah, blah. Thanks, Brett. You are the best. He wanted to know, though, we talk a lot about compromises and things like that and how to prevent them, but what do you do after you've gotten hacked? And he also was kind of wondering about warning systems such as Tripwire and the like. What can be done to detect early warning signs that someone has gotten into your system and those kinds of things that can detect a breach? He says, thanks. And also, he put his IRC nick in the chat room, which is awesome. Nanobulik or something.
Okay. I know who this is now.
Oh, yeah? Oh, there you go. I love when people put their IRC nick
I guess this is why he sent in the question.
Okay.
So the first thing to do after a compromise is, don't touch the machine. What you want to do is take a forensic image of the drive, right? So before you do any analysis, before you touch it or do anything, what you want to do is make an exact copy of that hard drive so that you can work off that and not touch the original.
Sure.
You want like a bit-by-bit copy too. You don't want to do any kind of fancier imaging like Norton Ghost and so on has, where it only does the not free space and stuff. You want bit by bit. You want everything.
Yeah.
Especially, if you're doing forensics and they erase the logs, you need the slack space to be able to try to reconstruct that. We talked about that once before with one of the big botnets that got taken down, and they had gone back and erased some stuff, but researchers managed to get some of it back.
Right. What was that?
I forget which botnet it was, but go back a couple episodes.
Yeah, exactly. It's in there.
So anyway, you want a bit-by-bit copy, and you don't want to ever write or change anything on the disk in any way. Then you want to pull that disk out and put it away for safekeeping, especially if you have to maintain chain of evidence and stuff. And then you want to do all your analysis and forensics on the copies of that first image. You don't actually want to use the original. So you take the original hard drive and you image it either to a file or another disk. Then you don't want to work on that either. You want copies of that so that you can always go back to that virgin copy again if you break it or mess it up. And you don't want to have to go back to the original source drive again, because especially if it's evidence, it may be the law enforcement may have taken it already and you don't have it anymore. So you want to work on a copy of a copy of the original.
Right. No, it's true. It's very true. They put me through that. They put me through training for the bank. And that was exactly it. You work from a copy of a copy, and you have a master that is the legit forensics approach they take.
And that's because as you work on it, like if you mount that file system, as you're traversing through it, you're changing the last access times on all the files and the last modified times sometimes, or all kinds of things, right? And if you don't want to disturb that original copy, because you may need the original, unmodified, untampered copy for legal proceedings. Like if you find out who broke in and you're trying to sue them, you need, if you modify or tamper with the drive in any way, it loses all of its evidentiary value and it can't be used as evidence anymore.
Major loss.
So your best bet is to boot off a live CD, but not just any live CD. Especially a lot of the more friendly live CDs try to be helpful and mount every partition that they can find on your computer, so that you can just browse through all your files. But you don't want that. So if you can find one that's specifically designed for forensics, like I think you covered one on last.
We did. Yeah, we covered Deft Linux, and Deft just released their latest version, Dart, and it includes like digital forensics tools specifically for this kind of stuff. It includes note-taking tools for what you find. It includes searching, also imaging tools like DD and things like that. A bunch of log files that can read Windows logs and all kinds of really good
log
tools.
Is a crazy binary logging format that is very helpful to have tools to read.
Yes.
Right. So you want a live CD like that, and then because you don't want it to mount the target partition, because A, you can't image it while it's mounted, and B, you don't want it to change the last mount time on the file system. So yeah, you boot up that CD and you make your copies, and then you can work on your copies of copies. So yeah. Everybody's favorite tool for this is obviously DD, and you can use that to image the drive to another drive or to a file, and then you can work off the copies. This also works with a damaged disk, right? Like even if you're not doing forensics, if you have a hard drive that is dying, has bad sectors,
sure.
What you can do is, especially because when you try to read a bad sector on a disk, the disk keeps retrying and it takes a long time to give up, and your performance just sucks. So what you can do is, if you use DD, you can send some options, like they have a switch called conv equals no error, comma sync. And what that means is, if it runs into an error, DD won't stop copying, it'll keep going. And the sync command says, if you can't read the input, write nulls to the output. So what that allows you to do is basically make a second drive or an image file that is everything that's on the original drive with the error parts nulled out because you can't read them. And then again, if you use a block size of 1 megabyte or so, it'll be a lot faster than the default 512 bytes at a time. You should, like, on the good parts of the drive, you should be able to get 100 plus megabytes a second, which makes copying a 500 gig drive take a lot less time than if you're doing it in 512 byte blocks at a time, because you can only do so many IO ops per second.
The chat room is also recommending DD Rescue, which seems to come in particularly for the crashed hard drive scenario when you have some bad sectors.
Because especially if you're going to try to do recovery on it with something like that, a lot of those tools are destructive, meaning once they try, they start changing the data. Like SpinRite is an example. Although SpinRite is meant to work on the original drive, but like SpinRite says, if the data is so important that you're going to send it away for recovery, but that's really expensive, don't run SpinRite first, because it's going to read and write that data trying to recover it, and if it doesn't work, the data is destroyed. So that's again why you want to make sure you work on copies of copies. Although SpinRite tries to recover that unrecoverable information, where your DD image is going to have skipped that. So SpinRite won't work on this image thing, but
I will put a link to DD Rescue in the show notes.
Yes, and also the live CD you talked about.
Oh yes, I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well.
So, and then the other part of your question was about Tripwire. So, when you asked about Tripwire and things like that, the problem with Tripwire is that you need to have been running it before the incident for it to be very useful.
Right. Totally.
So it has a fingerprint database of basically the MD5 or SSA hashes of your system files. And then it can compare them until the file's been modified. And it can trip an alert. Right? It's called Tripwire. And so if some file in your system is modified, you get an email about it the next day when Tripwire scans once a day or whatever. And if you installed the newer version of that app and you know why the file changed, good. You say, all right, allow that change, update the fingerprint, and go ahead.
I actually found the Tripwire reports an interesting way to just analyze all the different files that updates and scripts would touch on a system, because you could get reports after the day of a batch of updates. Like, geez, look at all those files. So it's good from that sense too.
Yeah. But if you don't have the database ahead of time, it's not that useful.
No.
Although if you have a backup, you can sometimes go to that backup and get all the fingerprints from that and try to compare it to the compromised system after. But if you don't know exactly when it was compromised, you don't know which backup to look at, right?
Yeah.
Another option is FreeBSD. Actually has the FreeBSD update command that I talked about that uses binary diffs to update the system,
Yeah.
it has an IDS command, which actually compares all your system binaries against what the latest official version is. Because the FreeBSD update command actually works by using the SSH56 fingerprint of every file.
So it just uses that to also, you don't have to, you can just use the tool to run a check on your system then.
Right. So what you can say is, check all my files and see if any of them are not the latest version.
That's sweet.
And it's like, oh, this file's been modified from the stock version. Of course, that unlike Tripwire, that only works for the base system files.
Right. Whereas Tripwire is anything on the file system.
Right. So because FreeBSD is combined, that's the kernel and the whole user land, but it doesn't cover programs installed from packages. So like if when you install sudo, which is from a package, that's not covered by the FreeBSD update. So again, Tripwire is useful there. The thing with Tripwire is that fingerprint database is on the machine that was compromised. So do you trust that fingerprint database now?
Right. Definitely going to depend on the type of compromise. If it's some sort of script kiddie low-hanging fruit attack, then
yes, it'll alert you. But if they rootkit it so that Tripwire doesn't detect the change, or they run the commands to update the Tripwire fingerprint database so that it matches the new modified version of the file, then you won't get that email. Although you can do things like store it on like a read-only media of some kind.
What about going a different route? Because if we're kind of thinking the prevention route and the detection route, what about something like Snort or some other IDS where it actually is actively monitoring the network
Snort
traffic?
is looking at network traffic.
Yeah. So you could throw this like on a firewall or a pfSense box in front of your servers.
That's the network-based IDS, basically, instead of a host-based IDS. And that's good, and you probably want both because Snort isn't necessarily going to detect a modified file, but it is going to detect a lot of the activity that could lead up to that.
Behaviors. Yeah.
It'll detect when your machine all of a sudden starts scanning for other machines to infect.
Right. And that'll help, he's looking for ways and indicators. Snort would give you an indicator that something has happened. But all of these things really work.
Traffic exists, or IDS, the host-based IDS detects when files have changed. So you probably want both.
Right.
And so the advantage with the FreeBSD IDS thing is that instead of using a local fingerprint database, it's using the official FreeBSD security officer's fingerprint database for each of these files. Right? So it's comparing against the official build, basically.
Right.
Rather than the locally maintained list.
A trusted source.
Yeah. So actually, in my Microsoft security class in college, I actually wrote a paper on using Bacula as an IDS.
Right. You told me that. That's great.
So basically, it's as part of the backup, it can take the MD5 or SSH fingerprint of each file. And so you can run a verified job that just goes and checks all the files on your Windows or Linux machine, saying, has this file changed? Right? Is the fingerprint on this file different? So you can use that as an IDS, and in that case, the database of what a good fingerprint is stored on your Bacula server, which is somewhere else on your network, which can be more secured. Or isn't going to be compromised necessarily just because one individual machine was.
See, I love that because A, it is off the machine, which is good, and B, you're getting backups, which is also good. So it's two birds, one stone.
But also it's centrally managed, right? It means you keep one fingerprint database, possibly one fingerprint database for all your machines if they're all the same.
Yeah.
Or you with Bacula, you can do base backups where you can say, all right, this is the base for all Windows machines or Windows XP machines, and this is the base for all Windows 7 machines, and this is all Ubuntu 10 whatever machines and Ubuntu 11 whatever machines. So that you can. But yeah, it means it can be a lot less work if you're going to have to manage 100 machines and protect them from spyware.
Well, and if you need to get backups,
and Tripwire, it's good if you're doing one machine, and Bacula is overkill if you have less than 5 machines. But if you're doing 10 or more machines, something like Bacula can be a lot less work to set up and manage than something like Tripwire is.
Yeah, and again, that effort's going into also getting you a great backup system. So it's like it's like you're getting double your return.
Yeah, and again, that was kind of the idea with the FreeBSD update tool. Is it there to update your file system or your operating system, but because it knows the fingerprints of all the files to tell if the file needs updating, it can tell if the file is an unofficial version.
I like it. Should we move on to Jono's question?
Yep.
All right, so Jono writes, let's see if the prompter thing works again. Jono writes in, he says, hey guys, I use VirtualBox for testing desktop stuff, and I have VMware ESXi machines for hosting a few different servers. I want to replace the VMware machine with something open source. So I've been messing around with Zen and KVM a bit. I'm wondering if you could talk about these and other such alternatives to things that run closer to the bare metal. What is your experience with them and best ways to administer them? There's lots of GUIs and command line wrappers. Or maybe you think VirtualBox is good enough that the performance is comparable to a Type 1 hypervisor. Now, of course, he's getting a little technical there, but we'll continue on. The probably the core crux of his question, though, is how do you think VirtualBox stacks up compared to some of these other hypervisor solutions out there?
VirtualBox is pretty good. I've run VirtualBox. VirtualBox works on top of FreeBSD, which is a big bonus that VMware doesn't have anymore. They did back like many years ago, but not anymore. And Zen and KVM. I think there's eventually going to be support for Zen. I know people are working on it, and you can run FreeBSD in a Zen and on Amazon EC2 now. But I don't know that you can use FreeBSD as a host for Zen yet. So VirtualBox is the only one that you can run on top of FreeBSD right now.
Well, that's a win for you.
Yeah.
KVM and Zen are popular on Linux. KVM is becoming more so.
Yes, because I used to use QEMU before VirtualBox came to FreeBSD, and
that's really slow.
It had KQEMU, which made it pretty fast. But
fast by whose definition?
Well, fast compared
to a thirsty man on a desert island, because
compared to what VMware Workstation was at the time.
Okay, all right.
Long time ago. This is before hardware virtualization.
Okay, all right. Okay.
Right, so yeah, the advantage with KVM is that you're using hardware virtualization, right? Support from the CPU to make it work.
Yeah.
And so at that point, that's when QEMU kind of shifted to Linux only. So yes, Zen, KVM, and VirtualBox are not bare metal, so they require a full host OS. For most of those, that would be Linux. But I don't know if Zen can run on top of Windows or not. I don't think so. But anyway, so
Windows, and besides Windows 2008 has Hyper-V, which isn't bad. It really isn't bad. It's pretty fast.
But that's not really bare metal, although if you run it on top of
Windows Server Core, but it's still not really bare metal.
Then it's kind of halfway between bare metal and a regular hypervisor type thing.
Yeah.
So Zen, KVM, and VirtualBox are not bare metal, so they require a full Linux host running underneath, which can take up some of the resources of the machine. Right? If you only have so many gigs of RAM or whatever, then losing a portion of that to the host OS means they have issues. So he's using VMware ESXi, which is commercial but free, right? They have ESX, which is the pay one, and ESXi, which is the free one. If he wants Zen but bare metal, they have Zen Server. It's similar to ESXi in it's bare metal. It uses a very stripped down version of CentOS, just like ESXi uses a stripped down version of Linux. I don't know if it's CentOS or different.
It's an old Red Hat.
Okay. Well, Zen Server uses a stripped down CentOS, so it uses a lot less resources than a full Linux with Zen on top. However, Zen Server is a commercial product, but there's a free version, and then there's enhanced versions that have extra features that cost more. So you can use Zen Server for free, but it is still commercial software, not open source.
What do you think of his question about VirtualBox in performance versus some of these other solutions? So most of
the performance comes from the hardware virtualization, which has to do with the CPU you run it on.
Yeah,
and that's kind of become the great equalizer to all of these different things.
VTX, the VT and the VTX extensions in modern CPUs have really sped up virtualization, and all of these virtualizers take advantage of them. But like a hypervisor virtualizer, my understanding would be is that the guest operating system is actually aware that it's being virtualized, and so therefore they don't have to emulate the entire hardware architecture so much as the drivers can kind of be a little more intelligent about how they communicate between the guest and the host.
And Zen supports both modes, hardware virtualization and the para-virtualization.
And so you could see a performance benefit going to Zen over VirtualBox, but I've never seen it myself.
But again, it depends what you're using it for. If you like you say, he uses VirtualBox for doing a bunch of stuff on his desktop, and that's fine. If you're going to do the server type thing, then Zen might be the solution there. Because Zen has both HVM, which is hardware virtualization, and then para virtualization, which is where the guest is aware.
Right.
And para virtualization usually means they used to require a patch kernel, but now all the kernels just ship with that built in.
But it does mean a more limited set of operating systems that will run as para virtualized.
Yes. So that is an issue.
I kind of wonder if I guess I would question what issues he's having with VMware. Is it what are the problems there? Because VMware is pretty good.
A lot of their management tools cost money though.
Yeah.
And so something like Zen Server, so it's same idea as ESXi, where the main version is free. But then there's open source management tools like OpenStack. Although OpenStack works with Zen, KVM, or Zen Server. Although when I tried it, I used Zen Server because that's what my goal was not to have Linux.
Oh, I see.
So Zen Server is sent to us on the base, but the idea is that, I'm not that great at managing a Linux server.
That's fair. That's fair. Yeah. I would say
again, my idea was I want bare metal because I want all the performance I can out of this machine. I don't want a half-used Linux machine.
Oh yeah,
I want a machine where every ounce of RAM can go into virtual machines.
So VirtualBox, here's the advantages I would say to VirtualBox. It has a great management system, either on the VirtualBox command line or with the GUI. It has awesome portability. You really cannot, if you need to move a virtual machine off to work on it and move it back to the server or move it between machines, it is so sweet to be able to get the same version of a virtualization program on desktops, servers, and if you need to throw something together, you don't have to worry about the license, you don't have to worry about the registration code, or if you've activated too many times. And in particular situations, that's extremely valuable. And honestly, I would do the performance tests yourself. I really have never had a performance issue with VirtualBox, probably for the last year and a half. It's been about where I want it to be.
And it can also depend on your workload. Some workloads work better under different virtualizers because they were tuned for that one operation or not.
Yeah. Disk I/O might be better on a pair of virtualizers.
Disk I/O is a big issue. So usually your solution there is something like iSCSI, so that the disk is being virtualized less. Or a method I went with for a couple of hours was instead of virtualizing the disk to a file, it's actually a partition on the physical hard drive. So it removes the host operating system layer from that stack of virtualization. The virtualizer, VirtualBox, is talking directly to a partition on the disk rather than talking to the operating system's file system, which is then talking to the disk. And so by removing that one layer, you gain more performance.
Yeah. Nice. All right.
And also it avoids like double and triple caching. Right? If the virtualizer is doing some caching, the file system doing some caching, and then the hard drive is doing some caching, you can end up with problems because of that, especially with write cache. And so talking directly to a partition can speed things up if you can't do iSCSI.
Now, are you ready to move on?
So the other thing I was going to say is OpenStack is very useful if you want to do a lot. If you're doing a largish public or private cloud system, OpenStack's quite good. The other one is libvirt, which is a virtualization library that provides a consistent interface that allows you to talk to Zen Server, and KVM, and I think even VirtualBox, QEMU.
I meant to mention
that. One interface.
Right, that's an effort coming out of Fedora and Red Hat.
It's like a API translator.
Yeah, it's pretty badass.
One API you write to, and then it speaks to Zen Server, KVM, or VirtualBox. It's actually OpenStack uses it.
Oh, well, look at that. Look at the little ecosystem of open source. That's awesome. All right. Are you ready to move on? We got 2 questions left. Two questions. The next one comes from Gene. Here, I'm going to give the prompter another spin. Here we go. He says, Gene writes in, he says, first off, thanks for the awesome shows. He makes his 2-hour commute to and from work slightly more tolerable. Boy, Gene, do I know what you mean with that one. He says, I'm a software, hardware developer, and our system admin team makes our lives miserable. We have to do everything through our system admin team, and they want absolute control. The running joke is you need to put a support ticket in to turn your computer on. We've actually started putting them as risks in our project plans and develop mitigation plans. Our system designs have to work around the limitations of the approved Dell that they will only let us use, and now we have to move everything to only Windows 64-bit. And he doesn't seem to be very happy about that. Red Hat Enterprise Linux will not even be allowed because they don't want to deal with the hassle, again in quotes. Is this normal? What are the frustrated and depressed users to do? Thanks. And thanks again for the awesome show. I have definitely witnessed this. And for a little while, I lived in one of these IT departments before I really realized what was going on. I will be bold enough and I will say I have watched IT departments really gum up a otherwise decent company with bureaucratic processes and slowing things down and injecting themselves in every meeting and getting involved. And there's this really fine line you have to walk. Back to this example, I had a client who was developing this piece of hardware, and they had, a hardware engineering team and a software engineering team that was writing the code to run on that piece of hardware. And unbeknownst to the IT department, they were adding an Ethernet port and the ability to remote administer that box, the software they're writing on there. And this is a critical piece of infrastructure equipment. And because they were doing that outside the IT department, we weren't able to look in at the security practices they were using, and they shipped a product that had big issues. So then the company sort of re-engineered the project process so that way IT would be looped in on everything. But that just caused IT to grow horizontally at this exponential rate. And of course, pretty soon, everything was coming through us for approval. So I kind of appreciate how this happens. Have you ever experienced this?
You also hear stories the other way around, where every time IT wants to do something like upgrade, they're told, no, you can't because that might break something,
Oh, yeah.
And, the rest of the company can be holding the IT department back as well.
Yeah.
But it happens both ways. It's what I call big company syndrome.
Yeah.
It's why I don't like working for
It is the problem with bureaucracy,
companies.
and it's the problem when you have a culture of inaccountability. I think the only way IT truly survives in this
too
is
much accountability when you have to be accountable for everything. So you have to you try to avoid committing to doing anything, so that
that's exactly what
if it goes wrong, it's not your fault.
Right. It's this whole issue. It's this whole issue of either avoiding accountability or so much CYA that it just becomes too much red tape. And there's not like a silver bullet for this.
And it also comes back to Paul Honeycamp's famous the bike shed, right? It's an open source kind of, it's almost a meme. And the idea is that if you're trying to build a nuclear power plant, then the committee will just give you approval and say, all right, here's all the money, here's huge piles of money, go build a nuclear power plant.
Right.
However, if you want to build a bike shed, every single person on every single committee will be there. It's like, well, it should probably have a barbecue, right?
Yeah.
In case we want to have a barbecue.
Right.
And we should paint it red. No, we should paint it blue. And because everybody wants to have their opinion heard and wants to feel like they're being useful and that they contributed.
Right.
So if it's not when it's a big project that you have the problem, it's every little thing where everybody has to have an opinion where you have the problem.
Where everybody thinks that they have an opinion, that they have an educated opinion, so they want you to hear it.
Yeah, and the thing this originally came from was it was an argument over a proposal in FreeBSD whether the sleep function call should accept fractions of a second or not. And so everybody on the mailing list had an opinion.
Right.
Whereas if it had been something complicated in the kernel, nobody would have said anything. They'd been like, sure, you can make that change, or no, we don't need that. But because it was something so small that everybody thought they understood, everybody had an opinion. I
don't know of a way to fix this other than to make them accountable any way you can, because that's what they're trying to avoid, is you need to start kicking a little bit of butt. I really think it comes from the top, though, and I don't know of a way to fix it other than leave. And I have actually left, because I've watched it happen, and it's not good. It's not healthy.
On what the IT department's main issues are and so on, I can see them trying to focus on, let's just have all Windows servers so that we don't have to have, a team of Windows servers and a team of Unix guys.
Yeah, the part where he mentioned about them not... servers, right? The part where they say they won't let him deploy Red Hat Enterprise Linux, that is normal. The IT wants to standardize, wants to go by procedures and policies. That just makes it easy for them to bring new people on. That makes it easier for them to manage and mitigate risk. It's not great.
We saw this problem at the college. The IT department, their last Unix guy left for a different job. And so they were left with nobody that could manage the one Unix server they maintained for the students' little web hosting thing.
Now, at the same time, all of these things generally offer some sort of support contract. So if your company is comfortable with that, contractors are actually a way.
Red Hat Enterprise Linux, so they're already paying for the support.
Right. I mean, seriously, Red Hat Enterprise Linux is fantastically supported when you pay for it. Also, finding people to work on it is not a hard thing to do. What I just realized, this just dawned on me, but really the reason why I was able to make a living as a contractor is because these companies go to contractors to get stuff done. And that's why I see so many of these broken companies, because a contractor can be held accountable, a contractor can be blamed, and a contractor can be fired. And those three things make it perfect for a company like that to bring somebody on, give them the job, and then they just make that contractor work through all of the hurdles, because that contractor has to take it on as part of the project, and they just have to push it through. And of course, that's the difference. That's often how you become a
and
successful
so
contractor.
that could be a solution there is that, all right, we need this bit of infrastructure. The IT department doesn't want to or can't support that because they're a Windows only shop.
Right.
Then we need to hire a contractor to manage our 3 Red Hat Enterprise Linux servers to let us build this part of the project
and you got to just spin it. You got to spin it like, we're looking to reach out to a dedicated support group because this is just going to be an appliance application that we're going to use internally. We don't really need it to be managed by the IT department because we know you guys have a lot on your plate. So we just figured we'd get this support contract in place. And look, here, we've pre-bought 15 hours with them. So if anything comes up, we can just call them on the phone and they'll come right in. And you just set it all up like that. And that might be one way. But it's not pleasant.
Yeah.
I feel you, man. That's a rough one.
Big company syndrome sucks.
Yeah. All right. Well, the last question in episode 42 comes from Crash Benedict, who is chatting away in the IRC chat room. Should mention, we do this show live, jblive.tv at 1 p.m. Pacific on
Which is
Thursdays.
4 p.m. Eastern or 2100 UTC.
Boom. There it is. All right. The last question of the day comes
from... Or you
from...
can go to jupiterbroadcasting.com/calendar to convert the times for all the shows into whatever your time zone is.
Good point. Good point, Alan. You speak the truth. All right, so Crash Bandicoot writes in, Crash Eggs Benedict says, I've never used SSH. When I was working in IT, it was all Windows. My days of Linux began after I quit, so my question is this. I would like to be able to SSH into my mom's computer as to be able to do things like run updates, fix settings for her, and etc. Both her computer and mine run Arch Linux. How do I do this? And thanks.
Yeah.
And I am taking this question, and I am making the assumption that his mom does not live in the same house.
Right.
I think I asked him in the chat room, but I don't know if he actually answered back.
Right.
But this is a great... I bet a lot of people out there have family they're trying to do updates for or want to do remote SSH to do these kinds of things. So I actually think this is a great question.
Most people probably haven't managed to get their mom to use Arch Linux.
Not Arch, no. No, Arch is definitely pretty hardcore. I wouldn't be too surprised if he had said Ubuntu in there. But when I saw Arch, I was like, okay, that dude's hardcore. Yeah. Okay. Okay, she says in the chat room, he says that she lives in another country. Yeah. So, okay. All right, so we know that we need to deal with the ability to transverse firewalls now.
Yeah.
And we got to keep it real easy for mom. We don't want mom to have to do anything super complicated in order to allow him in. But he wants to keep her updated. Plus, a new version of Pac-Man just came out for Arch Linux, so he probably wants to get that installed because it has package signing now. Am I right? Yeah. So I have a couple ideas. Do you have anything you want to throw out there?
A couple things. If you have more than one machine at the house, when you go to do the port forwarding, you are going to have to use a couple of different ports so that the different ports forward into port 22 internally. Also, unless you're serving other people other than just yourself, using a random or at least a different port rather than 22 will keep half of the bots away from you. It's not very much protection, but every little bit helps. So you're going to you need to forward port 22 or some port to port 22 through your firewall. Or in this case, it's not really a firewall. It's a little NAT router probably.
Yeah.
So that you can get into the machine. And then obviously, like Chris was going to say, you need some kind of dynamic DNS system. Most routers have support for a bunch of these different services. And the idea there is that if her IP address changes, it updates some DNS name so that you just use that every time you want to connect to her and you can find the moving target that is her IP address.
That makes it much easier. So then it's just like mumhelp.dynndns.org or something. You don't have to worry about the IP. Yeah.
Or if you want access to the graphical user interface, then you have more options like X11 forwarding or over SSH or something like Hamachi, right? We talked about LogMeIn's service.
Yeah, now
or
I don't know if
even just VNC.
You could do like VNC over SSH for sure. And he's mentioned TeamViewer as well. I was going to suggest Hamachi. Now, they only have the beta for Linux, but Hamachi sets up a VPN between your machines. You run a Hamachi on one machine, you run Hamachi on another machine, and it creates a private network where you get addressable IPs between the two. And you could use that to browse Samba shares. You could use that just to SSH into each other. It handles all of the IP changes. It handles setting up all of the tunnels. And it's like you're just on the same local network. It's just going to be it's going to be as slow as your connection is. So you have to expect that. But for SSH, that's going to be no problem.
Yeah.
The thing I like about that is no firewall changes. No firewall changes needed. You just run SSH. And, you could even have the SSH to configure to only accept connections from local networks or even the Hamachi interface.
Yes.
That could be a little extra layer of security.
So yes, the advantage with something like TeamViewer or LogMeIn Hamachi is that they take care of getting through the firewall for you.
Yeah.
Which is especially if you're using this to help people other than your mom, where you can't have gone through the setup ahead of time, or don't want to, or are helping people all the time and don't want to have to go through the setup every time. They have the advantage there.
Mm-hmm.
And then something else that a couple of people talked about is if you're using SSH, you can set up SSH keys rather than passwords, or in addition to passwords, so that you have your password locally. You type it in, and then you use the basically public key infrastructure (PKI) to log into to prove your identity to the remote machine, so you don't need a password every time.
I like that, because then you could get scripts. You could get scripts going, right? Run the mom update script, and it just logs in, no password needed, does the stuff. I think that's a good way to go. That combined with Hamachi would be really slick, because then it's this nice private connection. You don't even need the encryption that Hamachi provides, but it's just nice to have it do the tunnel for you. And I think that would be the lowest impact.
That you had a good point there. If you're using Hamachi or some other VPN type thing, it allows you to do the listen only on the local and the Hamachi interface IP ranges, and that way you don't have the issue of the hundreds of bots always trying to pound and get into your SSH.
The other thing with going with Hamachi is it makes using VNC a lot safer. You don't even have to worry about tunneling your VNC session through SSH.
If you VNC without SSL, your password's not encrypted, and the password is limited to 8 characters.
Right, but through a Hamachi VPN session, you're set. You're
that's
fine.
Not a big deal.
Yeah.
TeamViewer is free unless you're using it commercially to provide support for people, like other than your mom. Like if you're charging for support, then you have to pay for a license. But
the Hamachi VPN is free from the Log Me In people. I put a link in the show notes and in the chat room. You can check that out. Well, there you go. Man, that was a big batch of questions. That felt good. Yes. So remember, folks, now we need more. So go over to jupiterbroadcasting.com/contact and fill out that form, or email us techsnap@jupiterbroadcasting.com.
Especially if you have a war story, because we're doing war stories next week.
Yes. All right, I think we're all done with feedback, yeah?
Yep.
All right, that means it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. And it's time for the TechSNAP Roundup. Yeah, that's what that crazy music means. The Roundup are the stories that didn't quite make it into the top news section of the show, but are still awesome. We want to talk about them, maybe just in a little more brief detail, and then give you links to do a little further reading on your own. Alan, we got a great Roundup, and it starts a little heavy this week. Should we jump into it?
Yes.
Okay. It's been something that we've talked about over and over the last about 3 episodes, and that's ACTA, which is coming right on the heels of SOPA and PIPA, but
although
it's global.
It's been in the works
for
like 2 years.
Yeah. Unfortunately, and this is actually an incredibly important part about the ACTA story, is it's been done in secrecy and a lot behind closed doors, not very, very heavily critiqued by various different people. I'll link actually to some of those critiques in the show notes.
Yes, but you showed a really good video about it in Fosho, the Fosho SOPA episode.
Right, you're right. So here's what happened today. On January 26, 2012, the EU and the 22 member states signed the controversial ACTA surveillance treaty. Now, this doesn't mean it's in law yet. It still has to be ratified by those member states, but it does mean that there was a ceremony in Tokyo, and the UK, Australia, Belgium, and a bunch of others were there to sign ACTA. Now, the US has already signed this back in October. Think of this as a worldwide, not just copyright enforcement law, but all types of innovation, like patent law for drug companies, and there's a lot of things in here that sort of make it a global policy that each country will then take and interpret and enforce with their own existing punishment laws. And this is like SOPA, only much worse because it's outside the U.S. It's a much bigger deal, and it's already well underway too.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a little bummed because the internet doesn't seem to be reacting as much to this one. Like SOPA went real big, partially because of Reddit.
And ACTA, there's been the odd thing on the internet about it for years now, but yeah, it's just not getting the same level of reaction.
I'm getting a lot of emails from viewers outside of the US who are very, very concerned about it, and they're freaking out. I mean, I got emails today about it, just going back and forth with people on it. A couple of different guys just this morning before TechSNAP And and people are now beginning to ask on Reddit, why is the internet not reacting to ACTA? And I brought up this issue on Google Plus right before the SOPA stuff really hit hard. Really was all build up. Right, like a day or two before the protest, I said, is the internet blowing their collective activism wad on SOPA? Are we gonna? Because SOPA folks, and I got flamed for this, but I said SOPA is just the current battle in the big war that we're about to face. And I feel like we're using all of our arms on the first fight, and we're just gonna get rolled over on the next one. And look, we're just days later, and you look at the timing of things, Alan. First, you had the SOPA and PIPA in the Senate and in a committee for Congress, just being developed almost on identical timeline tracks that were very similar in their language, that were supposed to come up at the same time because they knew one of them wouldn't. So they figured they were going to get us with at least one of them. And then when that fails, after the SOPA Day protest, there was that massive mega upload strike that was very heavily publicized. That the timing of that seems a little suspicious. And then here we are, just even a couple of days later, and now ACTA has been signed over in Tokyo in a big ceremony. I mean, look at the timing of this. There's a big global thing going, a big play.
I'm not sure if the ACTA thing was actually pushed up specifically so that they could let's get this through before people organize another protest.
I mean, Metal Freak in the chat room says that SOPA and PIPA were a distraction, so we wouldn't do anything about ACTA.
Not necessarily, but even SOPA and PIPA aren't dead yet, right? It's just they shelved them enough to appease everybody, and everybody's, oh look, we won, all right, we're back to our business, and they'll just reintroduce them in a couple months.
Now, according to the BBC, folks in Poland and a few other countries are actually taking to the streets to protest. It might actually come to this. I mean, it really might actually come to this. The internet, the idea that we would ruin some fundamental principles about the internet.
Or the only part of our economy that works.
Right. The only part of the economy that's making money worldwide, all over the place. Right. And where all of the innovation is coming from, where all of the communication between people and the direct access to knowledge is happening, the fact that we would endanger that for the betterment of crappy entertainment and excessively rich prescription companies, it offends me as a person, because this isn't about die hard for getting copied. This is about access to information and communications. And some people on Reddit are calling for a black march where everybody just says, I'm not buying any of these goods from the companies that support this stuff.
Any entertainment products, basically.
Who's going to really do that? We're really in a bad situation here because we're willing to give up some fundamental freedoms. And we're not talking like the U.S. Constitution. We're not talking about laws. We're talking about human freedoms, knowledge, the actual spread of knowledge, like something that's bigger than books, bigger than radio, and bigger than TV combined, and we want to ruin it for copywritten material and bad prescription drugs. It does not. My brain takes this data in, and it's like a completely foreign format to my brain, and it cannot read the file. It does not understand. So I'm angry, and I want people to get angry about ACTA. So we're going to put links in the show notes. We've got to start doing something about it. Let's get organized, people, like we did for SOPA. And these while they've signed the treaties, and these are being done like trade treaties would normally be done, they're going to get signed in by the individual nations as local law, and it's something to watch. It's freaky as hell.
Because I have questions about how that applies in Canada, where we have specific laws about prescription drugs with price controls and rules that after so many years that the generics are allowed, whereas this ACTA seems to propose where the generics would never be allowed.
Right. Well, and like one of the people that I was emailing back and forth with this morning, I think he was in Poland. He mentioned to me that it could be incompatible. I've been wondering what are the European ISPs because ACTA requires that the ISPs actively log everything you do, and the ISPs become liable for your copyright infringement, so that they are supposed to then log and monitor so they can stop you before they have a chance to get in trouble. Which is freaky as hell, and also
I remember they tried to pass a similar law in Canada a number of years ago, where they were going to make ISPs have to log stuff. But the smaller ISPs are like, well, you want us to spend $100,000 on Cisco hardware to log everything every user does for 2 years?
I know.
It's like, we're small. It's like, sure, the 2 or 3 giant monopoly telecommunication companies can do that.
Yeah.
but you're basically going to drive all the small ISPs out of business, and
Right.
it's going to ruin the internet in the country because the big companies don't provide good quality service. They just screw you around.
If people did a little Google searching, they would find that there is a company based out of California who supplies the internet monitoring, logging, and censorship devices to the Iranian governments and China, has been lobbying in the U.S. for ACTA because they want to turn around and sell that same equipment to the U.S. ISPs and to the Australian ISPs and to the Canadian ISPs. They developed it for Iran, and now they're going to use it for all these other countries. I mean, it is amazing. And what some of these people who've been emailing have pointed out, that the EU has been currently working on these fundamental rights to privacy that are also have a lot of technical issues, but would be completely incompatibility with the laws of ACTA and all of the logging.
Yep.
Because some of the things that the EU is working on is that a user can request all data on them is deleted immediately. Whereas that would be in complete contradiction to ACTA.
Yeah. And at the same time, it's, the couple countries that are for this ACTA thing, like the US, are basically bullying other countries saying, we'll take away your preferential trade status if you don't sign ACTA. And it's like, basically, we're threatening your entire economy if you don't ruin it using ACTA.
Yeah. There was a WikiLeaks cable out about that, where we were pressuring the US was pressuring the Italian government.
There's another story I didn't get to cover this week, but the Chinese government pressured NASDAQ to kick a Chinese news network that refused to censor what it was saying out of their studio.
Oh, lovely. Lovely.
Yeah. Again, WikiLeaks provided cables proving that, the U.S. government was involved in censorship.
I'm working on a new show that will sort of continue some of these threads, like following ACTA and SOPA and things like that a little more closely, because I think it's just going to be a component of that show, because I want to continue to cover it in our other shows too. It's that important. But there's so much going on and so many parties that are interested and that are making their play right now. And what we will do for commercialism is just astonishing. Should we move on in the roundup and talk about Rogers? What happened with Rogers?
So Rogers, which is one of the biggest telecommunication companies in Canada.
Yeah.
It's one of the big three. There's Bell, which is the old phone company that used to be in monopoly, but still is.
Yeah.
Rogers and Shaw. And basically, Bell and Rogers are cell phone providers, home phone providers. They provide, Bell is satellite and Rogers is cable TV. And between Bell, Rogers, and Shaw, they also own almost every single TV and radio station in the country.
Yeah. Jeez.
But Rogers has really bad traffic shaping on their home internet service.
I've heard that.
And basically, the CRTC, which is the Canadian Radio and Television Committee or whatever, they are basically like the US FCC, and they regulate this. And basically, they've, with some help from Cisco, have managed to prove that Rogers is in violation of Canadian net neutrality laws, and has demanded that Rogers either provide their own evidence to prove that they're not, or fix their traffic shaping by February 3rd.
Well,
it's nice to see net neutrality isn't entirely dead.
That is actually, I mean, really a good thing. Rogers needs to be smacked around.
Yes.
So, I mean,
basically, well, the worst part is, though, the traffic they're shaping is like P2P traffic on the specific ports, like BitTorrent on the default port.
I've heard they do it to Skype too.
Yes, because they want people to buy their home VoIP service instead, but which is the whole point of net neutrality laws. But anybody who's torrenting something for, to commit copyright violation is using a torrent client that uses a random port.
Yeah, totally.
But what this is affecting is
like Linux distros.
BitTorrent. Well, yes, the BitTorrent client built into the patcher for World of Warcraft.
Yeah, exactly.
Which uses the default port.
Yes.
And so it gets shaped really bad.
It's always the WoW players that get the stick on that one. It really is.
Well, technically, Blizzard could solve that by using a random port instead of the default port.
Yeah.
But, I actually, when I was seeding the torrents for the Linux Action Show, I went and reconfigured our torrent to use a very random port, because I noticed a lot of people were getting bad download speeds from my server
because of that kind of thing.
Because their ISP was shaping their traffic.
Yeah.
When it was on the default BitTorrent ports. And so,
did you see that coming from anybody in the US?
I didn't actually look up what countries it was from. I just fixed it.
Yeah, definitely. No, I hear you.
But yeah, so it's nice to see that the COTC, which has a reputation for being made up of all people that used to work for the companies that they're regulating now, and so being kind of limp-wristed about it, is actually, demanding that Rogers actually comply with Canadian law.
That's good. That's good.
It is.
I have something that's kind of interesting in the roundup. A little bit of a different angle. Nokia is making waves with their Windows phones, and I think the financial arrangement between Nokia and Microsoft is extremely interesting. Smartphones are a huge market right now, and the competition couldn't be more fierce. And I found a really interesting article over at the Next Web about the platform payments that Microsoft provides to Nokia on a quarterly basis of over $230 million that Microsoft is just cutting to Nokia for supporting the Windows 7 phone platform. Nokia then takes that money and subsidizes some of their nicer phones down to like $99 to compete with the other smartphone vendors, but really they're primarily competing.
A separate story that came out recently was that Apple's growth in the market share is edged out Google a little bit for the first time in quite a while. And basically,
did you see their results for last quarter? Did you see what they got? It is they're now the most valuable company in the world.
Yeah,
Apple
but basically,
it's stupid.
The market share on smartphones was about 45% Apple, 45% Google, and 10% other.
Yeah,
and Microsoft obviously would like to have a bigger piece of that pie, and especially when they're trying to integrate stuff, just like the iPhone has a lot of integration with like OS 10 and iTunes. Basically, how much extra money does Apple make off the fact that people have to have iTunes and use it for their music on their iPhone and iPads?
Actually, not very much. You can look in their financials, and they only make about $1 billion off of iTunes, which sounds like a lot of money. But when you have a company that makes $426 billion,
right? But if they didn't sell any iPhones or iPads,
or valued,
iTunes wouldn't make any money.
Right. It's a whole part of the ecosystem that these other vendors have to compete with now.
Microsoft is trying to grow their ecosystem, and to do that, they need to have Microsoft devices that people use.
But it's interesting to pay Nokia $250 million every quarter because that undercuts all of the other Windows mobile phone makers. Like, they can't compete with that because Nokia, at a certain level, doesn't even have to have that great of performance in terms of sales to still make $1 billion in a year.
Yeah.
Or whatever it's going to end up here, 2 years or something.
If Microsoft made the phones themselves, they could basically run that and have that as a loss or whatever, and it would not really be any different. But is it any different than the fact that when Google does Google branded phones, they have Samsung manufacture them?
Yeah.
But basically,
what it is going to be is when Google has Motorola phones, and now Google owns Motorola Wireless.
Yeah. And also, how many other companies make Microsoft phones?
A handful.
Yeah, and most of them also make Android phones, right? And so Nokia is just who is willing to take Microsoft's money.
Now, I have a quick little state of the Reddit union, I thought, because I know we got some Reddit fans in the roundup. I put this in the roundup, so you guys can go read it more.
This one's also interesting, even if you're not interested in Reddit itself.
Yeah. So here's I'll give you a couple quick numbers. They said that in December of 2010, they had 829 million page views and 119 servers. Today, January 26th, I think they posted this today, they have 2.07 billion page views with 240 servers. That's an increase of 149% page views and 101% increase of servers.
So they got some extra efficiency in there.
They went on to talk about moving away from ESB volumes and talked a little bit about Postgres and Cassandra.
If you remember back when we covered the big Amazon outage, Reddit was affected by that, and they've since moved more and more away from Amazon.
Yep. And they don't really come right out and call out Amazon, but that's what's there.
Yeah.
Good post though. Fun to read. I love what Reddit. And what's great about Reddit is they just post like screenshots of their Google Analytics page because they got nothing to hide. So they just like, boom, here's the analytics. Here's what it is. And man, these guys get some traffic. So, all right.
Yeah, now, but if you're into managing or scaling servers, this is a really interesting read, even if you don't really care anything about Reddit.
It's a good case study in scalability.
Yep.
Last story I have in the roundup, unless you want to add anything in there, is you remember that Symantec story where they say they only got source code from 2006 and it's not really a big deal?
Yeah.
turns out it might be a little worse. Symantec is releasing patches that fix 3 vulnerabilities in PC Anywhere 12.5. That's the current version. They say on Monday that they'll continue issuing patches until an entirely new version of PC Anywhere to address all of the currently known vulnerabilities has been released, and they're recommending that people shut down PC Anywhere, Symantec's remote admin tool. Looks like this might be related to that breach, and the hackers got access to the source code and were able to identify and launch new exploits against PC Anywhere.
As far as I know, PC Anywhere hasn't changed much since 2006, and that's probably the issue.
Probably, huh? When I first started using PC Anywhere, it was for dial-up. People would dial into a machine.
Exactly. It's like Windows 95. It's like, I didn't know they still made that.
Yeah, man, they do. Vendors and stuff like to have modems sometimes in case internet connections go down.
Yeah, well, and, it did work over TCP/IP for the internet. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
And, but I think part of the problem is I don't think it's changed that much, and it's probably been a security weak point the whole time.
Oh yeah,
and just now that, because the other thing that came out in the story, interestingly, is it seems that the source code was stolen in 2006, and Symantec didn't find out about it until Anonymous started sharing the code that they had managed to get their hands on from a breach that happened in 2006.
At least Symantec isn't in the security industry, so this isn't like huge egg on their face that should be losing them a ton of credibility. At least it's not like that.
Well, it's not like they've been compromised the entire time since 2006. It's just something that happened in 2006, and they just never knew about it.
The thing is as you know, they've been building off of that same source code since then, so you just never know for sure.
Yeah, I'm sure there's plenty of vulnerabilities in there. Of course, working through that, finding a vulnerability, and then finding, they accidentally fixed that one, damn it.
Like Metal Freak in the chat room says, if it was open source, that wouldn't be an issue, because that's kind of how open source works. It's out there.
It would have been the same issue, except for we would have found out about it.
Yeah, exactly.
In 2006, and it would have been patched for it.
Exactly. I would have been in a mailing list somewhere like, hey, you goobers, you totally missed this. And it'd be documented. Mm-hmm. Alan, I think that brings us to the end of episode 42.
Yes, probably the longest episode ever.
Now, we should give a quick plug. You joined us on the Linux Action Show last weekend and reviewed FreeBSD 9.0. So if people out there are curious about that, go check out that episode of LAS and hear Alan's review, which...
yes, and it was a rather spirited debate between Brian and I. It was quite good.
Yeah, and in the show notes for that episode of Linux Action Show, Alan has a torrent file of a FreeBSD setup box for VirtualBox. So if you want to download that and just start playing with FreeBSD.
It's an OVA, so you should be able to run it in VMware as well.
We got a guy in the comments saying that he did use it in VMware. He mentioned he had to make a few tweaks to make it work, but I had
to help somebody from the chat room had VMware Fusion on a Mac, which didn't recognize the .ova files.
Oh yeah?
But
so
a .ova file is just a tar file, which inside of it has a VMDK, which is a VMware disk, and an XML file describing the machine. So you can make it work anyway.
That's cool. Well, that works out.
Yep.
All right. Well, there you go. I think that just about wraps up this episode of TechSNAP. Now, TechSNAP comes out Friday mornings over at jupiterbroadcasting.com. Like I mentioned earlier, we stream it live on Thursdays. Probably just the best place to check that is jupiterbroadcasting.com/calendar, because like Alan mentioned, we have a link in there where you can convert it to your time zone. And also, don't forget, before you shop at some of those sites, check out the links at the bottom of Jupiter Broadcasting. And I should put a quick plug in for the Jupiter Signal. We're working on next month's newsletter, so now would be a great time to get signed up so you don't miss it. You can go to bit.ly/Jupiter Signal, or you can find, I should include something probably towards the bottom of the show notes, or somewhere in the show notes, I'll have a sign-up form for the Jupiter Signal, where you might find out more information about shows we have in progress and a few other cool things. So check that out. All right, Alan.
I throw a brain teaser in there every month usually too.
Yeah, which is actually proved to be quite popular. I think people really like that. So, okay, everyone. Well, thanks so much for tuning in to this week's episode of TechSNAP, and we'll see you right back here next week.